Welcome to the Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy Global Summit. I am your co-host for this session, Dr. Deas Wandrea Pennington-Vazio. I am an integrative physician and certified psychedelic-assisted therapy facilitator. And today I have the good pleasure of interviewing Sergio Rodriguez Castillo.
Hi,
welcome.
Happy to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to connect with you again. It's always such a pleasure. Before we get started, though, I'd love to read your bio just to give people a background insight into your illustrious career, okay?
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Sergio Rodriguez Castillo, LMFT, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a MAPS MDMA-assisted therapy practitioner, and a lead psychedelic facilitator at Beckley Retreats, with over 18 years of experience in sacred medicine. He holds a Mexican JD, a UK LLM, and practiced law for 12 years before fully dedicating himself to the field of psychospirituality and psychedelic therapy. He trained at notable institutions in India, including the Sadhana Institute, Osho's Ashram, and the Ramakrishna Mission, and he apprenticed with a Mazatec curandera for over a decade. Sergio holds master's degrees in integral counseling and East-West psychology, and is currently a PhD candidate developing a blueprint for training psychedelic-assisted therapists. His academic contributions extend to his roles as core faculty at CIIS, AMPI-DET, and Protocol Q in Mexico, where he's also mentored in the Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies program at CIIS. In his practice, Sergio focuses on existential growth and consciousness expansion, helping people rediscover who they truly are. He is actively involved in facilitating, teaching, developing curricula, and mentoring future guides, contributing significantly to the evolving field of psychedelic therapy. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea. Happy to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure. And I think with your background, especially given your apprenticeship with a Mazatec curandera and your vast experience with sacred medicines, I thought we could start off with what unique insights you have gained about traditional sacred practices and this modern world of psychedelic therapy. And how has your training really shaped your approach to enhancing the effectiveness of treatment?
Yeah, sure. Let me start by just making an important point, and I know you're aware of it. We've talked about this, but it's important for the people listening to also keep in mind the topic of misappropriation, exoticization, and romanticizing, right? I did train with a Mazatec teacher for 10 years, and I'm closely connected with the Mazatec tradition, but I'm not a Mazatec. I'm not a curandero. I'm not a shaman. I'm still a Mexican Western trained psychotherapist. And it's important to keep that in mind, because sometimes when we talk about these traditions, we either borrow freely from them without acknowledgement, and I'll try to keep that in mind myself. And we tend to romanticize or exoticize, the Indians from the this or where, or the indigenous traditions. So it's important to keep that in mind, that as beautiful and valuable as these traditions are, they also have challenges. And it is important for us to acknowledge those and engage with those and see how, just as they enrich us, we can also help them, right? So that's an important point when these type of questions are asked, to let know people that I'm not presenting myself as a Mazatec expert or even anything close to that. But anyway, that was not the question, but I always like to start there. So when I am a psychotherapist, and for a time in my career, I still do it, but not that often, that much. So, what is it that I do as a psychotherapist? And I concluded that I was a relationship expert, right? And relationship usually means, you're working with relationship, couples relationship, etc. But then I realized that there's more to it. There's the relationship to ourselves, right? Relationship to the world, to those surrounding us, and relationship to the universe, the divine or God, whatever you want to do it. So I think that as the core of psychotherapy. And coming to your question, when we think about the medicine, it's also about the relationship. it's basically about the relationship, the sacred plants, the sacred medicines, and some could argue even the compounds that were created in the lab, they have an essence, they have a spirit in them. And it is important to see that the mushroom, the cacti, the vines are not tools for healing. They're actually beings, they're actually teachers. And that's what these traditions keep reminding us. You don't ask what are the mushrooms. You ask who are the mushrooms, and you develop a relationship. And in some ways, especially in the Mazatec tradition, throughout this interview, I'll be focusing mostly in that tradition because that's the one that I know the best. You keep being reminded that a healer is called a person of power, right? And that power comes directly from their relationship with the medicine, doing their own work and understanding how to work with the medicine. So I would say that the most important thing is the relationship. It has been suggested, actually, that what mushrooms or psychedelics treat is disconnection, whether it's to trauma, disconnection to self and our own process, disconnection to our emotions, disconnection to others. And what the medicines teach us over and over is let's reconnect, let's be in relationship, and respectful relationship to the teachers, respectful relationship to ourselves, and so on. Right? Curanderos, just like psychotherapists, right? We say that for healing to happen, we need the engagement of the client. Curanderos also said, you need to do your part. I, the healer, curandero, I'm going to show up. The medicine certainly is going to show up, but you need to show up. So it's all about this relationship, this intertwined, beautiful relationship that takes place at all these levels, right?
I love that because it really does make it seem like you're not just sitting in a ceremony to have something done to you, you're participating in it.
Exactly.
And so,
yes.
A lot of people talk in our circles, they talk about how they felt called by a medicine or that these sacred plants could actually speak to them. What do you think is the primary message that sacred medicines are conveying to the people who engage with them? And how can that understanding be integrated into our modern therapeutic practices so that we can have the best outcomes?
I love that question. It reminds me when I was beginning my work, I was doing some research actually at the university, and I was talking to one of my teachers and say, well, I chose mushrooms because this and this and that, and I saw the twinkling in his eye, right? And he says, what makes you think that you chose the mushrooms? And that kind of blew my head open because maybe it's the other way around, right? And even Michael Pollan suggests how there is, again, a relationship between the medicine and us in which this is calling us. Going to your specific question, when I think about the message of the medicine, the mushrooms, this may sound like a hippie answer. Perhaps it is. I'm not against that. I think that the main message, there are many, many lessons that we can get from the medicine. And by the way, when I use the word medicine, I refer to the sacred medicines and plants, right? That's the way my teachers taught me to refer to them. So that's the way I generally use. The main message is you're fine. You're okay. You are loved, right? It actually reminds me, remember the poem of the Desiderata by Mike Ernst? There's this saying that, if I remember this correctly, whether it is clear for you or not, the universe is unfolding as it should. And to me, that is such a beautiful message. And I got it both in personal experience and with clients when I take people to Mexico, whatever, is this sense, that's when we get often what I call the divine laughter, right? I often see this in ceremonies. People just start laughing and just, what happening? Because it's so simple. It's so silly. All the things we go through in our head is because we don't see that everything is unfolding as it should. Of course, it's hard to believe that when you're struggling, when you don't have money, when you see the world, it is hard to believe that, but the medicine comes to reassure us that is the case, that things are happening as they should. When I work with in retreats, or when I work with people, and even when I was teaching students to become psychotherapists, I just kept saying to them, trust the process. Trust the process. There is something bigger than you happening, right? And it doesn't matter. And again, that's the hippie part, right? There's something larger to do. Whether you call it collective unconscious, inner healer, quantum coherence, it doesn't matter the language. There's something larger than us. Again, as I said before, you need to show up. You need to do your part, but trust that there is something larger than you that is happening as such.
I love that. I have been ignited back into my life as a musician and a singer-songwriter. And my next single that's coming out is called Trust the Process.
Woo, I want to hear it.
Yes. And it really has been this reminder that even in the heartbreak and the challenges, there is this divine intelligence that's moving, through everything that can really support us and guide us. And for me, these sacred medicines have been a part of that. And I love how in your work, you really do focus on this interplay between psychological mental health and spiritual development. We're hearing more people say that rather than psychedelic-assisted therapy be only focused on mental health, that maybe we could also look to these sacred allies to help this spiritual development. So I'm curious to know, how do you feel that sacred medicines facilitate this connection and spiritual development? And what are some of the factors that determine whether a process is going to be beneficial or potentially harmful?
Mm-hmm. Okay. To the first part of your question, in what the medicine has taught me, and not just the medicine confirms it strongly, but as you know, transpersonal psychologists have been saying, you know what, this dichotomy, we in the West love to separate and slice things up, right? With the doctors are not doctors anymore. They're specialists in the right eye or the left eye or this little piece, which is very useful. I'm not against it, but then sometimes we forget that it's just one human being, it's just one reality, just one experience, right? So this distinction or separation between psychological health and spiritual maturation or spiritual development, in some way seems to me artificial, and perhaps this may be too strong a word, misguided. Because I believe that they are part of one continuum. And this has been known for I guess, forever, right? The word psychology itself, psychotherapy, comes from as you know, and everybody knows, comes from the word psyche, that it means soul. So from the very beginning, psychology and psychotherapy had to do with the healing of the soul. Along the way, we kind of lost our path, and then we start talking about the mind, right? And just healing the mind. And then you start talking about mental health, forgetting that origin. So the medicine tells you that is just one big process unfolding constantly. And this was known, Abraham Maslow, who founded the humanistic psychology movement, right? He started exploring into what are the highest levels of human potential, right? Of human realization, self-realization. And very soon, he realized that when we get to those higher levels, the best of mental health, it's almost like the door opens. And of course, not only when you get there, it's open throughout. But when you get to that level, when the pyramid, you keep climbing this pyramid of mental health, the spiritual aspects just unfold. And then that's why he, with Groff and many others, as they were developing humanistic psychology, began developing transpersonal, because they say you cannot separate one from the other. So I believe that they're intrinsically connected, and once you cannot have one without the other. Maybe that's the easiest way of putting it. And you also ask, almost forgot. You also ask about risk, right? I believe that when it's done well. And this is a big caveat, right? We're talking about set and setting. We're talking about a good relationship. We're talking about doing our work. This experience are not harmful. And I know this is a big one. I'm very aware that I'm saying something that many may question. So that's why I say when it's done well, experience can be extremely difficult. But that doesn't mean that they're harmful, right? I use this metaphor often with clients or in groups. when someone that is going to therapy tells to a friend that is therapy naive, oh, yesterday I had a session with my therapist and I cried for the whole hour. And the friend says, oh, that's awful. And say, no, it was good. It was probably my best session ever. So we have to make a distinction between discomfort and harmful.
Yeah, so true. So true. And you talk about this idea about doing our work. And so I'd love to explore a little bit about, the optimal preparation. Like, what does that work look like? Because before we engage in psychedelic therapy, whether that's with a practitioner or with an indigenous curandero, ayahuasquero, and what have you, I'm curious to know, what are the preparation strategies that you find are most effective for ensuring that this is a transformative and safe experience? You definitely talked about the set and the setting and making sure you know the medicine and the people, but what else can be helpful for preparation?
Sure. First, I'm not doing it for you. I know you know this very well, but just to keep insisting, because I think that we cannot insist enough how important preparation and integration, but we'll talk about that later, how important preparation is. I mean, if you're going to go on a vacation, you prepare yourself. You make reservations, you check the guides, you check what are we going to do, restaurant, etc. Even more so if you're going on a pilgrimage or something more like that. So it is, again, naive and perhaps dangerous, talking about lack of preparation, not doing at least the same amount of preparation. The people need to be clear what are they doing first? Second, why they're doing it. Get a sense of what could happen. And this is a tricky one, and I'll say more about it in a moment, because as you know, experience the broad range of experience that can happen, right? But they need to know what could happen, what to expect. Because in my experience, the hardest journeys or trips or whatever you want to call them are those where people get surprised. And medicine, a friend of mine said, psychedelics, you know how you think outside the box? Psychedelics are by their very nature box breakers, right? It doesn't matter what is the box you're trying and how broad you want to make it. Psychedelics are going to smile and say, that's nothing. Let me show you how big it can be, right? But even though we cannot never be fully prepared for the experience, having a sense of direction, having a sense, you know what, it can be scary at time, and it would be helpful I can hold your hand or for you to ask for help, understanding that there are moments when they are going to see things that they might not understand. They're going to hear things that they might not understand and say that it's fine, it's part of the process. That helps them better navigate the experience. Now, there's a danger there, and we need to talk about that, because then people begin reading and listening and watching videos and watching documentaries. And then when I remember one of my first experience, personal experience, was very challenging. And I just kept saying to my guy, where are my unicorns? Where are my rainbows? I wanted to have this blissful experience, and instead of having this grueling, painful experience. So there's something about learning and then being able to let go, to say, you know what, even intentions are just suggestions to whatever bigger is going on, right? And being able to hold that very lightly as your preparation, your knowledge, it's important for the person to be able to face openly and willingly whatever the experience is going to present, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I'm curious, are there some specific spiritual practices or psychological practices that you think can help people really optimize their readiness for undergoing it? Like you talked about, being able to surrender, to be able to let go of those intentions and just be present. What techniques could we use?
Oh yeah, many come to mind. Meditation is I know meditation is wonderful for so many things that it almost feels like a cop-out, but it's true for one particular reason. Well, for many, but one in particular is that meditation is a training in observing your process, developing the capacity to observe without being moved by it. right? Labeling your thoughts, observing your mental process, etc. And when you are in a psychedelic space and in an expanded state of consciousness, you need to have that capacity. I mean, that capacity is innate in all of us. You could even say that that is who we are, the observer, the immovable observer behind everything, right? But being able to observe the process, oh, now I'm seeing these wonderful kaleidoscopic visions, right? Oh, now fear is arising. Oh, now there's a monster chasing me. Whatever it may be, there's aware that creating this buffer between stimulus and reaction is fundamental. Psychotherapy, and of course, in some ways I'm biased, I would say psychotherapy or a similar form of self-exploration, because it is important to know, to give you an example of one of my clients, right? And a client having not even a psychedelic experience, we were having a breathwork experience. And then in the middle of the experience, he's seen an image of his mother. And then that image, the mother transforms into a cobra. And it's very scary and very threatening. And he goes like, what's going on? This is wrong. But through psychotherapy, we understood, oh, there is this thing, and poor parents, right? Especially the mother. Since Freud, they're always a culprit. But there's something to it that it makes sense. This is a symbol for something. So instead of judging the symbol or rejecting the symbol, there's this capacity to accept and become curious. Curiosity, this is the word that probably used the most with clients, right? Not as Bill Richards, who is part of my dissertation committee, loves to say, what everything shows up in your psyche is not there to torment you, but to teach you. So get curious about it. What are you doing in my psyche? Right? Or when, as they say in the ayahuasca tradition, with Mother Anaconda pierced in front of you, you don't run away from the snake. You jump into the face, into the mouth of the snake to be able to see through the eyes of Grandmother Ayahuasca, right? So that curiosity is an important part. Those are three that come to mind. We could come up with more.
I think those are really good orientations. And whether it's a psychotherapy sessions to lead up to it or group work, I think it really does help in that regard. And so you talked about symbols. Like sometimes in our journeys, we see things that wouldn't necessarily make sense on an everyday basis. So I'm curious to know, as we're thinking about integration after an experience, which is such a crucial phase in psychedelic therapy, what sort of integration practices do you recommend that can help really solidify the benefits of these sessions? And if there are things that therapists can do to ensure that the insights gained, and again, it may be messages or symbols, how can we really make sure that those insights can be applied in everyday life, as in what we call integration?
Yes. And your question highlights the other part of what I said a moment ago, right?
Right.
It may sound too strong to say, but I believe that without integration, it doesn't even make sense to do psychedelics. Kind of in a somewhat provocative way to my clients, not to my clients, but people that come to me and ask me about psychedelics. Because if I'm working with them, it's because we passed this threshold, right? But people say, "Hey, I want to try this," and I say, "Well, what for?" I don't know. Sounds cool. So you know what? You should, if you want a cool experience, go to Disneyland. That's a cool experience. You're going to have a lot of fun. Which is even better, you're going to get a souvenir with big ears and stuff, right? Psychedelics are not for cool experience. I mean, you can argue about the value of recreational experience. I'm not talking about that. But if you want the experience to be transformational, you have to do the work of integration. Otherwise, very quickly, and this happens all the time, very quickly, a big experience, a mind-blowing experience becomes a memory, becomes something cool that happened to me back when I was in high school or back in college or 6 months ago. So integration is key. Integration is key, and we need to keep repeating that. Now, for me, integration is where the rubber meets the road, in a way. Right? You come back to Earth from this expanded state, and you go like, "Wow, that was amazing. I understand things better now." But you know how in chemical circles they say that there's a process for creation. There's a process for bringing things into fruition or into the world. It's from thought to word to deed, right? So the experience itself is the thought. You have the insight, you have the clarity there. Then you share it with people, and then you say, I am going to do this. I believe I need to change this in my life. So that's the word part. And the deed part is the action. So integration, eventually, after you come down, after you talk about it, needs to translate into specific actions, specific behaviors, because change happens through behavior. That's why a New Year's resolution rarely go anywhere, because it's in the behavior part where we get stuck. And it could be anything from simply changing self-talk. That's a big one. Oh, I'm such a stupid person. Why do I do that every single time? I need to change. To say, no. Can you find compassion to yourself? That's a behavior change. Like saying, okay, well, this is hard, but I'm trying to change and I'll continue changing. It could be changes in action. It could be changes in relationships. Sometimes it could be start a meditation practice, going back to meditation, but not just sitting meditation. It could be a walking meditation. It could be reconnecting with nature. I often ask clients, especially clients that are struggling with the results of PTSD, come back to your body. When you're in the shower, take a moment and don't listen to your phone or whatever you're doing, right? Take a moment and feel the water in your face, right? When you use the soap, apply the soap, feel it, really feel it, come into your body. Your typical example, walking barefoot on the grass, right? There's something about coming to your body, something about the way you relate to other people. So not every probably, but actions, behaviors. Now you ask how psychotherapy can help. I think psychotherapy, coaching, or other support mechanisms can be really helpful to keep you accountable in a gentle way, right? In a gentle way. Actually, when someone comes to me that is not my client and tells me that they had a psychedelic experience and they have this big set, well, what you have to do is for the next at least a month, because we know about this glow period after a psychedelic experience, right? You should ask your therapy to focus specifically in how is this experience going to change your life. You know how in psychotherapy we love, and in coaching as well, we love to wander around and go into different places, and we talk about something. For the next month at least, focus on how are you going to make this, how are you going to bring the experience into reality, into fruition, into your life. And psychotherapist, a coach, a spiritual counselor for that matter, someone that keeps you accountable, that's good, that's interesting. How are you doing with this thing? I think I haven't. Okay, well, gently reoriented your energy. So I think I'm just giving you one answer, which is put it into action, whatever that is and however that may look.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so when we look at it through this paradigm of therapy in the Western or the global North perspective, it's very different, I imagine, than what you experience in Mexico when you're with a Mazatec curandera. That whole paradigm is different. The idea of preparation and integration is actually woven into the society. Like people just, it's a part of their everyday experience to know there's the healer over there. I need to sit with this medicine. So I'm curious, if we think about how to apply certain teachings from traditional sacred medicine into our psychedelic therapy. Are there some traditional practices that you've experienced with the Mazatec that could help people better prepare for a journey or even afterward more effectively integrate?
Mm-hmm. This may be, I don't know if surprising, but the preparation and integration logic, whether it's between the Mazatecs or whether it's with a psychotherapist or a spiritual guide or something, they're not that different. The essence is the same. You, as I said before, you prepare to the experience, right? And in some tradition is a prolonged dieta, right? In some traditions include writing down your intentions. The Mazatecs for the Mazateks, for example, you don't eat the mushrooms just because you want to meet God. That was, as we know historically, that's a Western concept that was introduced. People go to the healer, to the curandero, because they have an issue, they have a problem, and usually a very specific problem in health. And this is something that they're talking with their community, they talk with their partner, they might have talked with the curandero a few times even before going to that. And there's this web of support in a way that this is understanding, yeah, you're going to do this, and this is a good thing. And then when they come back, the community themselves, not in a harsh judicial way, but the community say, okay, how are you putting it into practice? So it is not that different. Perhaps the way it's held by the community is different, right? I know a lot of people in the West that they do psychedelics that they say, oh, but I don't want people to know that I'm doing this, because what are they going to think? Or I don't want, especially with social media, I don't want people to know that I did this because if they learn that in my job, I could get into trouble. But that's a bit of a tangent. But there's a way in which is how you hold these two concepts, three concepts, preparation, experience, and integration. Obviously, in the specifics, there may be differences. For example, in the Mazatec, to give you one example of many perhaps interesting examples that I could give, they say after a ceremony, you should not have sex for at least a week. You should not give any presents to anyone. You should not take a shower at all. And the logic behind that is we need to keep the energy because the mushrooms are still active within you. So we in the West, we say, really? Not take a shower? So we may have a different way of understanding, but it is the way, okay, the logic behind that is I tell participants, I tell clients, protect the space of consciousness that you develop. That's why I tell them, don't drink alcohol after a ceremony, don't smoke marijuana, don't do, obviously, other hard drugs, because you want to protect the state of consciousness, the precious state of consciousness that the medicine gave you, the gift of that space. You want to protect it. So there's a lot of translation in. To give you another example, before ceremony, I tell clients to fast. Right. And the way my teachers told me it is, well, the mushrooms are the flesh of the God. That's what literally Teononacatl means. So you're going to be the vessel of God. So you have to be as clean as a recipient as you can be to receive it. That's beautiful. I love it. Sometimes I tell clients that they need to fast because, and this is way less poetic, I warn you, because you don't want the burrito that you had for breakfast to be competing with the medicine in your stomach, right? It's less poetic. I much rather give the first one, but there's a way in which we need to understand is the logic behind the practices.
That's really helpful. So just shifting gears a little bit, you are developing a blueprint for training psychedelic guides. So I'd like to know, what do you see as the most significant gaps in our current training programs? And for people who might be interested in learning, how could future curricula be enhanced to better help the guides so that they're able to help people with prep and integration in psychedelic therapy?
Oh, you have to be careful with what you ask, Andrea, because I could stop for a long time about this. I spent the better part or the best part of the last 5 years researching training programs, right? I review over 80 programs all over the world, mostly in the US, because that's where I am located, but not only in the UA, in here, that deal with psychedelic training. And the reason why I started doing that is because I got worried. Having been involved in the psychedelic field for so many years, so almost 20, as you said, I've seen the trends, right? And more the training programs, right? And of course, with what happened with Lycos recently, things may change and things are shifting. But I see the trend of these psychedelic training programs popping, pun intended, as mushrooms in a way, right? And I began to get curious about what is it that they're teaching people. And because I'm also a professor, I began to get people that, oh, I'm in this training and I'm in this training. And I said, well, what are you being taught? And realizing that there were things that are not being taught. So that's why I started doing this training. And again, after all this review, I concluded, to try to oversimplify, because I don't want to just keep talking about this for an hour. I could. As far as the technical aspect goes, I don't want to say most program, but the reputable programs, the good programs are pretty good. Talking about the different psychedelics, talking about what they do in the brain, talking about the neurochemistry, the neurotransmitters, even talking about how to hold a session. That's a little bit more leeway there, but they're pretty decent. They're pretty decent, the best program. And actually, a little tangent, one of the reasons why I developed the blueprint was precisely because I realized the people out there, two problems. Organizations developing programs, they don't have a blueprint. They'd say, well, I guess we should put this and this and this, and hopefully that works. And people trying to choose, especially the public trying to choose a program, they don't have a way of evaluating a program. So that was the idea of developing a blueprint that can work at both ends, right? For the public to evaluate them, or for developers to say, okay, what are the aspects that need to be included? So that was a little tangent there. So as I was saying, the technical part, pretty much the best programs, that they're covering it. Where they really lack, let me put it this way. I would say, following a very simple scheme, that any good psychedelic program should cover three aspects: the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and the transpersonal. The interpersonal includes the technical aspect that I mentioned before. Sometimes could be better, sometimes could be worse, but it pretty decent. The intrapersonal, most programs seem to lack a serious analysis of that. They either say, well, this program is only for psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatrists, so they assume that they already did their personal work, which is not always the case. Ideally it is, but not always the case. So we have people being trained that they have not really dealt with their inner stuff, their childhood wounding, their attachment styles, and the risk is that if they don't deal with that, they're gonna, as we say in psychotherapy, they're gonna act it out in the session, right? And that's very dangerous. So a good program should include the intrapersonal. And in the other extreme, so intrapersonal, fine. And the other extreme, the transpersonal, this is where most programs fail to, they pay lip service to the transpersonal, but the transpersonal is hard because it's not just about teaching it, it's about experiencing. And most programs don't have the time or perhaps the expertise to explore the transpersonal. And the danger here is that if you don't explore the transpersonal, it's a well-known fact, and I'm using the word fact here, that the psychedelics open the door to the transpersonal realm. So if the guides are not versed in working with the transpersonal, best case scenario, they're going to ignore it. Worst case scenario, they're going to pathologize. And that's really bad, right? There are other aspects. I call them in my dissertation the forgotten aspects, those two being the most important one, but other aspects that are also forgotten are usually the body, the relationship, the somatic aspect of the work. Funny enough, surprisingly perhaps enough, is not always included because it requires a certain level of expertise. So the body is one. The relational aspect, the healing happens in relational, both in psychotherapy and psychedelic spaces, right? So how do we deal with the relational aspects of the work, closely connected with the intrapersonal, but the relational aspect? And the third one, sadly, not surprisingly, and we touched on this one already, the respect for the indigenous traditions. There's like, whatever. They give, again, lip service. They include it in the historical aspect. Well, the Mazatec has been doing that, and the Amazonian people have been doing this. But when it comes to learning, honoring their wisdom, very few programs. There are a few exceptions for sure, but programs tend to don't really go there.
Thank you for that. It's very thorough, and I actually am looking forward to reading your dissertation. I want to learn all of this from you. Well, as we think about the outcomes, particularly the long-term psychological and even spiritual outcomes, what do you think are the most reliable ways that we could actually measure the effectiveness of psychedelic therapy? And, how can these measurements guide us in our preparation and integration practices?
Yes, I know what you mean. Having taught graduate students psychotherapy for 15 years or so, I could say that perhaps the holy grail of psychological work is how to measure success. It's a very difficult question, and it's one that still has psychotherapy divided, right? We have approaches that have, I forgot what's the word, like CBT, that they have the capacity to measure results, and therefore they're in many ways they are like the treatment of choice, right? And of course we can measure behaviors. That's why CBT is so useful in that. If someone comes to me and they're drinking or they're fighting with their partner or they have suicidal ideation, we can develop a very specific measurable plan to say, okay, let's look about, let's work for 3 months or 6 months, 1 month, whatever. Are you drinking less? Are you getting into less fights? Is the suicidal ideation diminishing or eliminated? Okay, this is working. So there are those ways in which we can measure success of something. When it comes to, and that's very valuable and very useful, and we should keep doing it. But then it comes with the deeper aspects of the work, right? How do you measure happiness, right? How do you measure if the person is able to sustain a meaningful and enriching relationship with another person? How are we measuring meaning? A good friend of mine, Jorge Ferrer, suggests that any such approach needs to measure 3 things: embodiment, connectedness, and the ratio between self-centeredness and selflessness. But again, as a psychotherapist, I'm not, even though I'm finishing my PhD research, I'm not a researcher. I'm by far a psychotherapist. I'm more interested in what clients report back to me. If the clients feel happier, if the client has more meaning in their life, if changes are happening in their life, I would consider that successful. But this is an open-ended question because, again, measurement procedures so far tend to be reductionistic and simplistic. There are some good instruments out there to measure happiness and to measure joy and to measure realization that are well taken into account. But this is, in my opinion, an open-ended question still.
Got it. Well, what have you seen with the folks that you take on pilgrimage? I think it's wonderful and fascinating, and I hope to attend. You take people to Mexico to have experiences with, true Mazatec healers. What have people said after these experiences? Has it been a reduction in symptoms, other realizations?
Beautiful question. Let me take a moment to think about that. So the reason why I started taking people to Mexico was because I kept hearing about people talking about, again, the mushrooms. That's my tradition, talking about the mushrooms, and sometimes even claiming lineage from Mazatec healers. Dude, have never been there. So I was like, this is going back to the appropriation. This is rather upsetting. So that's what the original reason why I started taking people to Mexico. And it was designed it was not as a trip to Disneyland. You go, take the mushroom, take a picture with the healer, and then you leave, right? It was never designed as that. It is designed as an immersive experience. So we go to Mexico, we learn about the Mexican history, we learn about and I know this is not exactly your question, but I'll get to it, believe me, in a roundabout way. So we learn about how the Mexicans have a relationship with Mother Earth. and how Coatlicue, we go to the Museum of Anthropology, so they see the Coatlicue, they see Xochipilli, and then we go to the Villa de Guadalupe and they see the Virgin of Guadalupe. So they begin to understand that these images represent Mother Earth, which is an image that they're going to find in their journeys. People find connection with the great mother, right? So they begin to get immersed into that. Then we go to Huautla, and we have ceremony, not only psychedelic or mushroom ceremonies, but also temazcal and other ceremonies. And the idea is for them to see that this is almost like a multidimensional exercise. And then we, even more so, remember that I talk about the challenges in these communities. We say, you know what? It's great that we're coming and we're partaking in their what they offer. Now we need to do something. So we go into faenas, which is what they call, we go and clean a road for the school, or we paint a school, or paint a wall, or paint a mural, or do some stuff in service of the community. And all of that help people get out of themselves and get in connection with Mother Earth, get in connection with others, get understanding that the medicine is calling us to service the world, to service others. So people return, now I'm going to your question, people return with a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. And I think that's again, going back to what the medicine does, is this connecting with our true, real nature, right? That is immutable. We have it, it's always within, but life, trauma, circumstances, social media, what you have, disconnect us from ourselves. So these experiences help us connect. So what I've seen in the retreats with Beckley, what I've seen when I take people to Mexico, is this idea that people expand their vision of who they are. They become curious. They reinterpret the way, even their trauma, but if not their trauma, their inner talk, they become to see, it kind of makes sense differently, right? It has been said, I heard many years ago when I was studying to become a psychotherapist, it is never too late to have a happy childhood. And I didn't quite understand what that means. And of course, you can say you can act childish as an adult. I don't think that's what it means. I think we may not be able to change our childhood, but we can change the relationship to our childhood story and traumas. So in that way, those to me, again, as a psychotherapist, not a researcher, those to me, when you see people smiling differently, when you see people standing differently in their own truth and claiming their power, when you see a different look in their eyes, to me, that's success. But again, that's kind of hard to measure in a piece of paper.
Well, thank you for sharing it anyway. I do think it gives us a flavor. Well, I have to say, Sergio, it has been such a joy to connect with you again. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights. For those who'd like to follow your work, where can they find you?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and it got me thinking. I'm a little bit of a sorcerer in the woods. I'm as a psychotherapist, I do my work more privately. I don't have an active online presence. Maybe after this interview, things are going to change. Who knows? Or after I think I'm done with my dissertation, right? I do have a LinkedIn presence. It would be Sergio Rodriguez-Castillo, just my name, Sergio Rodriguez-Castillo. Same thing with Facebook. That tells you that I'm old. I'm in Facebook, not in Instagram, right? But anyway, Psychotherapy SF. That you can Google my name, but Psychotherapy SF for San Francisco is another way of connecting me. I am in the process of updating my webpage, my website, sergiomft.com. So hopefully pretty soon that's going to be available. And if not, by email. Should I give my email?
You can if you like.
I'm happy to. So SEROCA@gmail, which is Seroca@gmail. You can reach me there, and I'm available, and I'll be happy to hear questions and comments from people.
Awesome. You are so very generous. Thank you again, Sergio, and I wish you continued success, especially with defending your dissertation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wanda. This has been delightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.